The countdown was already running when I opened the airlock, and I had 11 minutes left to save a life the entire galaxy had already decided was not worth saving. My name is Owen Marsh, and I was standing inside the dead corridors of a warship called the Ashen Light, 3 kilometers of broken metal drifting around a star nobody had bothered to name. Somewhere behind me, a Concorde fleet was waiting for my signal to fire a weapon that would turn this wreck, and everything inside it, into dust. Somewhere ahead of me was the reason I had risked my career, my safety, and possibly my life to stop them. I had read the report on this ship 3 times before I ever set foot on her hull. Every version said the same thing. Subject not able to survive. Recommend final termination. That is what the Concorde calls giving up, when they want it to sound like science instead of surrender. The wreck had been found 10 years earlier, spinning slow and silent through a region of space called the Verge, far from any trade route or settled world. Buried deep inside her broken frame was not just a machine, but a mind. A pilot from a species called the Varel, a species that had died out 400 years ago in a war that history had already forgotten. She had been fused into her ship so completely that no one could say anymore where the woman ended and the metal began. For 300 years she had been trapped like that, alive but fading, alone in the dark with no one answering her. Every 10 years or so, a new group of officials would study her, run their tests, and reach the same conclusion. Her mind was failing. Her body, if you could still call it a body, was collapsing faster than any repair could fix. The simulations always ended the same way, with her fading out before help could even begin, so the Concorde stopped trying. They filed her under acceptable loss, the same words they used for 1,000 ruined places before her. It was not cruelty, not exactly, it was just numbers, and numbers do not care how many years someone has been calling out into the silence. I was a maintenance technician, assigned to the fleet monitoring this sector, nothing more, nothing special. I read that file for the 4th time sitting in a shuttle bay, already in my suit, waiting for a clearance I already knew was never going to come. My supervisor, a tall officer named Cade Bellow, stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, the way he always did when he already knew he had lost an argument, but wanted to have it anyway. "Do not do this," he said. "The order is final. Command has signed off. That wreck takes a direct hit in 6 hours, and you will not be standing inside it when that happens." "She is alive in there," I said. "She is dying in there," he said. "She has been dying for 300 years. If you walk into that structure, one wrong move could bring the whole thing down on top of you." "Then I will not make a wrong move," I said, and I cycled the airlock before he could stop me. "You people," he called after me, "cannot leave anything alone once you decide it matters." I did not answer him. I was already moving. The inside of the Ashen Light was worse than any report had described, because reports never capture what a place actually feels like. The corridors were not corridors anymore, not really. They were something closer to scar tissue, walls grown over with a strange material that was neither metal nor flesh, threaded with faint lines of light that pulsed weak and uneven, like a heartbeat that had almost forgotten how to keep rhythm. My suit lights swept across the walls, and for one impossible second, I could have sworn they pulled back from me, like some old instinct still buried under 3 centuries of decay. "I am not here to hurt you," I said out loud, to a ship, because at that point, I had stopped caring how strange it sounded over the comm channel. "I am here to help. If you can hear me, I need you to hold on a little longer." For a long moment there was nothing, only the low groan of a structure that had been dying slowly since before my own grandparents were born. Then, so faint that my suit almost filtered it out as noise, a voice came through. "Why?" it said. Just that one word, barely formed, dragged up from a mind that had not spoken to another living thing in longer than my own species had known how to build a starship. "Because everyone else stopped asking," I said. "Someone should ask anyway." I moved deeper into the wreck, past collapsed sections and pockets of radiation that should have sent me back the way I came. My display counted down the minutes until the fleet would fire. 10 minutes left. I kept walking. I found her core chamber almost 40 minutes after I had boarded, though it felt like no time at all, and also like a lifetime. She was not a body anymore. Not in any way I understood the word. She was a shape, threaded through broken crystal and failing wiring, kept alive by systems that were running on nothing but stubbornness. Her readings matched the file exactly. If anything, they were worse. The Concorde doctors had not been wrong, not by the numbers they were trained to trust. By every measure they used to judge a life, she was already gone, or close enough that the difference did not matter to people with schedules to keep and other emergencies waiting. But I have never trusted a number that gives up on someone before that someone has stopped fighting for themselves. I opened my kit. I had a stabilizing rig meant for small shipboard repairs, not for restoring 300 years of damage to a mind fused into dying metal. I had no authorization, no backup, and no plan that any careful engineer would have approved. What I had was a refusal to be the kind of person who writes someone off just because the situation had become difficult. "Okay," I said to her, my hands already moving over the broken systems. "Let us see how much fight is still in you." The next several minutes were not clean, and I will not pretend they were. I rerouted power through systems that had not carried a real charge in longer than anyone alive could remember. I patched broken lattice using materials that were never designed for her kind of biology, guessing more than I would like to admit, hoping the rest of the time. Twice, her structure shook hard enough to throw me across the chamber. Once, a sound tore through every speaker on the wreck at the same time, and I understood, with total clarity, that I might be about to become the reason she died faster instead of slower. I kept working anyway. Cade called 4 times over that stretch. Command called twice more after that. My display still carried the countdown, ticking steadily downward, patient and indifferent, exactly the way the whole galaxy had been toward her for 300 years. With 11 minutes left, her signs spiked, not toward failure, but away from it, for the first time since anyone had begun keeping records on her. With 6 minutes left, I opened a channel to Cade and told him, as calmly as I could manage, that if that weapon launched, it would be killing something that had just, for the first time in 3 centuries, begun to stabilize. With 2 minutes left, the fleet held its fire. Not because Command changed its mind, because Cade, tired and stubborn and wiser than I gave him credit for, refused the order himself, and took the full weight of that choice onto his own shoulders. "You people," he said again later, quieter this time, "cannot leave anything alone once you decide it matters." "No," I said, watching her light pulse steady for the first time since I had walked aboard. "We really cannot." There was a night, 4 days after the fleet held its fire, when I truly believed I had lost her. Her light dropped without warning, dimming so far that the monitors around her core chamber began sounding alarms I had never heard before. I sat beside the broken lattice for hours, running diagnostics that gave me no answers, adjusting power levels that seemed to make no difference at all. A Concord medical officer named Ellie Ward arrived that night to observe the case, sent by Command more out of curiosity than concern, and she told me plainly that what I was seeing looked like the final stage of collapse described in every one of those 17 simulations. I did not accept that. I could not. I kept working through the night, guided more by instinct than by any real understanding of virile biology, adjusting one failing circuit after another, speaking to her the entire time even though there was no way to know if she could still hear me. Somewhere near dawn, her light steadied again, faint but constant, and Ellie Ward stood in the doorway watching the readouts with an expression I did not expect from someone who had come expecting an ending. She told me later that she had seen dozens of cases like this one across her career, and every single time, the outcome matched the numbers. This was the first time she had ever watched someone refuse to let the numbers decide the outcome instead. She stayed on afterward, not because Command asked her to, but because she said she wanted to see what happened when someone simply did not stop. It took 9 more days after that night before she woke up in any way that could be called real. Not fully. True recovery would take years, maybe longer, and nobody was promising a miracle. But her mind was there, present, aware in a way every Concord instrument had insisted was impossible. The first thing she said, once her voice steadied enough to be understood, was not "thank you." She asked why. "They all left," she said. "Every single one of them, for 300 years. Why did you not?" I thought about the file. About 17 different tests, every committee, every tired official who had looked at her and seen a problem too costly to solve. "Because you were still trying," I said. "That was the only thing that ever mattered to me." The galaxy had given up on her long before I ever came aboard that ship. They had filed her under acceptable loss, closed the report, and moved on to easier problems. But I have learned something. Spending my life among 100 different kinds of people who have made peace with giving up on each other whenever the situation gets hard. The galaxy does not have to believe someone is worth saving. It only has to be wrong, and it only takes one person who refuses to agree with that wrongness to prove it. I stayed with her through the slow months that followed, through repairs that failed twice before they finally held, through nights when her light dimmed so low I thought I had lost the argument after all. Cade lost his position over what he had done that day, but he never once said he regretted it. He used to visit the med bay where she was slowly being moved, piece by piece, into something closer to a real body again, and he would just stand there, watching the numbers climb, saying nothing, because there was nothing that needed to be said. Her name, once she could finally speak it clearly, was Ellen. Not a title, not a designation, just a name. The first thing that had truly belonged only to her in 300 years. She told me later that the worst part of all that time trapped inside the ship had not been the pain, and there had been plenty of that. It had been the silence. Not the absence of sound, because the ship groaned and cracked constantly around her. It was the absence of anyone asking if she was still there. I asked her once, months after that first meeting, what kept her going for 300 years when every single person who found her eventually walked away. She said it was smaller than anyone would expect. It was not hope, not really, not in the way stories describe it. It was something closer to spite, a refusal to let the silence be the last thing she ever knew. She held on, she said, because giving up felt like agreeing with everyone who had already decided she was finished, and some stubborn piece of her would not agree to that, even when her own body seemed ready to. I understood that better than she probably expected me to. I come from a species that has never been very good at accepting easy answers, especially when those answers involve leaving someone behind. It has caused us more trouble than most other species can imagine, chasing lost causes across every corner of known space, spending resources on people that better judgment says are not worth saving. But it has also meant that somewhere, in every disaster, in every ruin, there is usually one of us still digging when everyone else has already gone home. The Concorde eventually reopened her case, not because anyone suddenly grew a conscience, but because the numbers had changed. She was stable now, recovering, slowly. A living example that their 17 simulations had been wrong, and being wrong in front of an entire fleet has a way of making people reconsider their arithmetic. They offered her full citizenship rights within their systems, an apology dressed up in official language, and a formal review of the officer who had disobeyed a direct order to save her. Cade stood in front of that review board without flinching. When they asked him why he had broken protocol, he said the truth as simply as he could. He said that the moment her signs stabilized before that torpedo would have hit, he understood he was no longer choosing between following orders and breaking them. He was choosing between being right by the rules or being right by the person standing in front of him. He chose the person. He would choose her again. They reinstated him eventually, quietly, the way large systems often correct themselves without ever admitting they were wrong in the first place. He never seemed to care much either way. He told me once that some choices are worth making even if nobody ever thanks you for them, and I have carried that with me ever since. As for Ellen, she chose to stay near the fleet for a while after her recovery, though not out of any need to prove something to the people who had once given up on her. She said she simply wanted to see more of the universe that had almost let her disappear from it entirely. She wanted to walk on solid ground again, feel real weather on skin that was hers alone, hear voices that were not filtered through broken speakers in a dying ship. We traveled together for a time, across systems and stations I had never expected to see, and she asked questions constantly, about small things mostly, about food, about music, about the strange habits of my species that most other species find baffling. She once asked me why humans keep pets that offer no practical use, and I did not have a good answer beyond saying that we simply like keeping something alive and happy near us, and she laughed, a real laugh, the first one I had heard from her, and said that explained quite a lot about why I had refused to leave her behind. There were harder days too, days when the weight of 300 years of isolation would surface without warning, and she would go quiet in a way that worried me. On those days, I did not try to fix anything. I simply stayed nearby, because I had learned by then that presence mattered more than solutions, that sometimes the most important thing anyone can offer another person is simply refusing to walk away when things get difficult. Word of what happened aboard the Ashen Light spread slowly through the fleet, and then further, the way stories do when people cannot quite believe them at first. Some officials called it reckless, some called it foolish. A growing number, especially among the younger officers who had grown up hearing about humans and their strange refusal to leave lost causes behind, called it something closer to inspiring. I never much cared what they called it. I only cared that Ellen was alive, asking questions, laughing at things that confused her, existing in a universe that had once been ready to erase her from its records without a second thought. Sometimes she asks me if I regret what I did that day, given everything it cost, the risk, the trouble with command, the years of uncertainty that followed. I always give her the same answer, because it is the only true one I have. I tell her that the galaxy is very good at deciding who is worth saving and who is not, and it is very often wrong. It only takes one person refusing to accept that judgment to prove it. I was simply the person standing there when it needed proving. She still sometimes calls me stubborn, and she is not wrong. But I have come to think that stubbornness, the right kind, aimed at the right person, is not really a flaw at all. It might be one of the most important things my species has ever offered the rest of the galaxy, small as we are compared to the vast systems and ancient species that surround us. The Concord eventually updated their protocols after her case, adding new steps before any similar decision could be made. Extra reviews, longer timelines, a small acknowledgement buried in official language that their arithmetic had failed someone who deserved better. It will not stop every mistake from happening again. Numbers will always be numbers, and committees will always move slower than a single person standing at the edge of a decision that matters. But it is something, and something is more than nothing. As for me, I still work in that same sector, still walk the same corridors of broken and forgotten ships whenever a call comes in, still read every report 3 or 4 times before deciding whether the official conclusion is actually the truth, or just the easiest answer available. Most of the time the official conclusion turns out to be correct, but every so often it is not. And on those days, I remember exactly what it felt like standing inside a dying ship with a countdown ticking towards 0, refusing to accept an answer just because it was convenient. There was one afternoon, on a quiet green world called Marin, when Ellen stood outside for the first time since her recovery and felt rain touch her actual skin. She stood completely still for almost a minute, saying nothing, letting the water run down her arms, and when she finally turned to look at me, her eyes were wet in a way that had nothing to do with the rain. She told me that in 300 years trapped inside that ship, she had imagined this exact moment more times than she could count, and she had stopped believing it would ever actually happen. Standing there, feeling something as simple as rain, meant more to her than any of the medical reports or official apologies that came afterward. I think about that afternoon often, more than almost anything else from that whole experience. It reminds me that saving someone is rarely about grand moments or dramatic decisions. Most of it is quiet, most of it is small. It is standing beside someone through the boring, difficult, uncertain stretch of time between almost losing them and finally seeing them stand in the rain, alive, present, and no longer alone. The galaxy gave up on Ellen a long time before I ever met her. It is still learning, slowly, that giving up is not the same thing as being right. I never did leave her behind. I am still not planning to.